Hello Channel NITT viewers, I am DS and welcome to another episode on Channel NITT. In many of my episodes, I have informed my viewers that I will be doing an episode on cognitive functions and cognitive stacks very soon, and this is the video on it. I have been thinking about this video a lot. I want to present to my viewers a theory that will be easy to understand. So what you are going to see in this video may be something very alternative. If you really like this explanation for MBTI cognitive functions and cognitive stacks, do share it. If anyone were to do a research on the MBTI, they can trace it all the way back to Carl Jung. And Carl Jung was a psychoanalyst. So to help us to understand the MBTI cognitive stacks and functions better, I will be using a concept from psychoanalytic theory. And that is the id, ego and superego. So many viewers may have heard of this concept of the id, ego and superego. So in psychoanalytic theory, you are the ego. However, deep in your subconscious or your unconscious, there is this id and the superego who are always trying to influence your decisions. So the id is this impish fellow inside your unconscious that always wants things immediately. It wants to be satisfied immediately. It is the one that screams, "Now! I want it now!" In popular culture, the id is usually personified as the demon. The id works on the pleasure principle, so it wants immediate gratification. It cannot wait. It is also the one that may encourage you to cheat during an exam. The id is the one that may encourage you to have unprotected sex. I would use the words immature and impulsive to describe the id. Moving on, we also have the superego. So this superego is like your guardian who is always there to monitor and inform you of morality. So while the id is screaming to you, "Hey, take a peep at your book. Nobody is watching, nobody will know. You need to get good results." Your superego will be telling you, "No, that's unfair to the people around you." Alternatively, the id may be screaming, "Don't use that condom, you will get maximum pleasure." The superego will tell you, "No, it is very dangerous to do so." So the id and the superego are in constant battle.
Hello there, hello there, hello there.
Anyway, the superego is also part of your unconscious. So in popular culture, they have to personify it. They usually personify it as an angel. So you have a red demon over here and a white angel always trying to give you input on what you need to do. So if I want to describe the superego, I would use the words careful and restrictive. According to psychodynamic theory, the id and the superego form part of your personality structure. So if you have a very strong id and you always give in to the impulses of your id, you are more of an impulsive person. You might also not be very successful because you delay work. On the other hand, if your superego is more persuasive and you tend to side with your superego more, then personality-wise, you may be more conscientious, more disciplined. So what does the id, ego and superego have to do with the MBTI? So in the MBTI, we have 8 cognitive functions. You can split these 8 cognitive functions into 4 pairs. And these 4 pairs can be classified into 2 judging pairs and 2 perceiving pairs. And all these 4 pairs consist of opposing functions. You can treat this as the superego and the id functions. So as you can see over here, we have 4 pairs of cognitive functions. As you can see, the 8 cognitive functions can be viewed as 4 opposing superego and id pairs. Before we talk about each pair, let's first understand how the pairs work. So each of the pairs are formed by a superego and an id function. So at the same time, the superego and the id may be giving you input, advising you to side with them. In order for you to side with either party, you have to suppress the other party. So for example, if you choose to side with the superego, you have to suppress the id. With that in mind, we will now discuss the 4 cognitive pairs. Let's talk about the judging pair first. TE, FI. TE is your superego talking and FI is your id talking. So one scenario could be giving commitment in a relationship. Your TE would say, you need to stay because this is what commitment is. Think in the long run. If you keep doing this, she will abandon you. Then you will be left with no one. You will not get married. You will not have children. Your FI will say, you are still young. Freedom is most important. You need to have the time to enjoy the world and not be pinned down by one single individual. So now you can see TE and FI are opposing functions. You have to side with either one of them. And relationship is just one of the possible scenarios. So there are a lot of other possible scenarios like work, normal daily activities. So the TE and the FI, if you have this cognitive pair as your judging pair, then you will be always giving you input where you have to decide which side to side. In the long run, if you have chosen TE as your preferred judging function, then it will be ingrained and wired into your brain. And subsequently, FI will either become your tertiary function or your inferior function because you use it less. Let's consider the pair FE and TI. FE is the superego and the opposing function is TI, the id function. So one scenario could be asking your mother for money. FE might say, she is your mother. If you cheat her of this money, imagine how sad she will be. She spent 30 years raising you up and she has treated you with love all the time. How can you do this to her? So FE is about empathy. TI on the other hand says, she is your mother and you are her son. You deserve the money. She doesn't want to give it to you. So you have to just take it by cheating her. TI is about thinking of your personal interest. So in the end, you have to make a decision whether to side with FE or TI. Anyway, I am using very extreme examples to illustrate the difference between the two functions as either a superego function or an id function. Most of us do not encounter the dilemma described in the video so far, but the id functions and the superego functions may express and manifest itself in other ways. It's just that in this video, I am using a more exaggerated example so that you can see the contrast between the two functions. They are opposing functions, which means that in order for you to side with one, you have to suppress the other. Okay, now let's move on to the two perceiving pairs. First, we have SE and NI. So NI is your superego function and SE is your id function. SE, your id will say, I want it now. I cannot wait. Just go for it. Do it. Your NI will be there as a barrier, caution barrier to say, wait, is this really the right thing to do? Think about it first. Plan. Pause.
Otherwise, looks like this problem will only disappear when the little bug menopause.
Think about the options. Is what you are doing impulsive? We also have the pair NE and SI. NE is your id function and SI is your superego function. So your id function NE may be saying, hey, look at all these bags. They are beautiful. I want them all. I want to buy them all now. Oh, imagine going out with this bag to the first party. Imagine taking this bag to show Sally. Ooh, she'll be so envious. Oh, your SI will tell you, stop. Do you have enough money? You have to be careful. If you want to buy, just buy one will do. Remember, you still have to save up for the house. You cannot spend all this money on all these bags. This is not a wise thing to do. So you may have this experience, right? Going to a shopping center, suddenly you want to buy this and that. And then there is this filter, this voice inside you telling you, hey, you can't do this, this is rash. So basically, from the MBTI point of view, it is your NE and SI at work. Alternatively, it could also be your NI and SE at work, because the SE wants to enjoy, the NI says wait.
Wait a minute, this is too deep, too deep.
So when talking about MBTI, we have to choose from one of these judging cards and one of these two perceiving cards as our MBTI for cognitive functions to become our cognitive stacks. So as an example, I am an ENTJ, and ENTJ uses TE as the dominant function. What this means is that I use TE most of the time. I use TE perhaps 80% of the time. What this means is that I have to suppress FI. So if I use TE, I will have to suppress FI. Since I use TE most of the time, FI becomes least used of all the 4 functions. Naturally, maybe FI is only used 20% of the time. So immediately, it becomes my inferior function. Now take note, if you choose the superego function as your first function, then your second function must also be a superego function. The same thing goes for the id function. If you choose the id function as your dominant function, your second function, which is your auxiliary function, will have to be another id function, because overall, your id is able to persuade you more. So in my case, I use NI as my auxiliary function. So NI becomes my second function, and immediately the opposing function SE becomes my third function. I would probably use these two functions in the ratio 60-40. So if you can understand this logic, then you'll be able to understand the cognitive stacks better. Now here comes another point. If my first two functions happen to be superego functions, then I am a J-type. If my first two functions happen to be id functions, then I am a P-type. There is definitely some credit in looking at the MBTI this way. I have personally profiled students from the normal academic stream and the normal technical stream. They happen to be P-type. So what this means is that their id functions are the functions that they prefer. They don't want to study, they just want to enjoy now. And that is why they end up in the normal academic or the normal technical stream. Also, because the id functions may always be encouraging the individual to not delay gratification, to always enjoy the now, the individual who are the P-types may tend to be smokers or even drug abusers. If you take a look at the people around you, the smokers are usually overrepresented by the P-type. Of course, there are also going to be very successful P-types in life. So, take for example, Donald Trump is a P-type. Now, Donald Trump is an ESTP, so he uses SE and TI, which are both id functions. SE will always make him say, I want it now. America cannot wait. And TI is a function that will always make Donald Trump come up with self-serving logic. Sometimes you can also think of TI as my logic is the correct logic. So as you can see, there are successful P-type people as well. So it is not necessarily so that if you indulge in your id functions, you will be a failure. It's just that from the MBTI point of view, if you are a P-type, id functions win over your superego functions. And superego functions win for the J-type individuals. So they might go out to play, then suddenly their superego will tell them, go home, you need to work tomorrow. So they might have a problem trying to enjoy life. So there is always a trade-off between the J and the P. Of course, society will definitely favor the J, or a rich P. Anyway, I hope that this episode has helped you to understand MBTI better in terms of the cognitive functions and cognitive stacks. If you have not subscribed, do consider subscribing, as we will be doing a lot more MBTI videos. Okay, I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. Do share, like and comment. And I'll see you again in my next episode. Goodbye!